The words, "Your services are no longer required," echoed in the cavernous, marble-floored lobby of the St. Augustine Grand Hotel, each syllable a perfectly polished, ice-cold stone dropped into the fragile pool of Eleanor Vance's life. They didn't crack, they shattered. Mr. Harrison Blackwood, the hotel's general manager, uttered them with the same dispassionate precision he used to critique the fold of a napkin or the clarity of a water goblet. His face, framed by silvering temples and an impeccably tailored suit, was a mask of detached disappointment, as if Ellie were a faulty piece of equipment rather than a human being whose world he had just obliterated. The transgression, an act of unsanctioned compassion. She had given a cup of chowder and a roll, leftovers from the lunch service, destined for the bin, to a man who looked like he carried the weight of the world in the slump of his shoulders. A man whose worn coat and weary eyes didn't meet the hotel's five-star standard of clientele. For this, she was being publicly dismantled, as two security guards, men she'd shared coffee with just that morning, materialized to escort her from the premises. A burning humiliation washed over her. She could feel the stares of the wealthy guests in the lobby lounge, their curiosity piqued by the quiet drama. She saw the pity in the eyes of her fellow staff members, quickly masked by a professional neutrality she knew was born of fear. She had worked at the St. Augustine for 7 years. She had polished its silver, memorized the preferences of its regular guests, and poured her soul into upholding its reputation for service. Now she was being cast out like refuse, her simple act of kindness deemed a greater stain on the hotel's pristine image than the food waste she had tried to prevent. But what Ellie didn't know, what Mr. Blackwood in his cold certainty could never have fathomed, was that the quiet, weary man she had helped was not who he seemed. He was a ghost from the hotel's past and the key to its future, and his return the next day wouldn't just change her life. It would expose the rotten foundation upon which the St. Augustine's modern empire was built, shaking the Grand Hotel to its very core. The morning had begun like any other, with the shrill cry of her 5:30 a.m. alarm. For a moment, Ellie lay in the pre-dawn darkness, listening. She was listening for the sound of her mother, Margaret, stirring in the next room. Some mornings, she would hear the gentle hum of her mother singing an old lullaby. On others, a confused murmuring as Margaret tried to place herself in a world that was slowly, cruelly, fading from her grasp. Today there was only silence, which was its own special kind of anxiety. Alzheimer's. The diagnosis had landed 3 years ago, and since then, Ellie's life had been a frantic tightrope walk over a chasm of medical bills and emotional exhaustion. She was 32, but she felt ancient. Her reflection in the small bathroom mirror showed a woman perpetually on the edge of sleep. The vibrant, hopeful young woman who had dreamed of being a photographer was now a collection of worry lines and a tightly pinned bun, the uniform of practicality. Her job as a lead waitress in the Palm Court, the St. Augustine's iconic lobby lounge, was her lifeline. It was more than a job, it was a performance. Every day she donned a crisp black dress, a starched white apron, and a smile that had to be bright enough to mask the gnawing fear that she was one missed shift, one unexpected expense away from total collapse. The St. Augustine paid better than most service jobs in the city, and the tips, on a good day, were the difference between affording her mother's medication and choosing which bill to pay late that month. As she buttoned her uniform, her mind was a whirlwind of checklists. Did I lay out Mom's pills? Is the door locked? Did I remember to call the neurologist's office to reschedule? And always the professional checklist. Today's soup is butternut squash with ginger. Mr. Abernathy in room 802 likes his tea with exactly 1.5 lumps of sugar. And whatever you do, stay off Mr. Blackwood's radar. Harrison Blackwood managed the St. Augustine not like a hotel, but like a museum. To him, guests were patrons, staff were exhibits, and any deviation from his curated vision of perfection was a flaw to be immediately removed. He walked the floors with a chilling, silent grace, his eyes missing nothing, a stray crumb, a scuffed shoe, a smile that didn't quite reach the eyes. He believed the hotel's legacy, built by the Croft family over a century ago, was in his hands, and he protected it with a zealotry that left no room for humanity. "Eleanor, your pace this morning seems leisurely," he had commented to her last week, his voice a silken threat. Remember, efficiency is the bedrock of elegance. He had said this as she was patiently explaining the menu to an elderly woman who was hard of hearing, a task that took an extra 90 seconds of her time. Those 90 seconds were, in Blackwood's ledger, a debit against the hotel's bottom line. She kissed her mother's forehead, a silent prayer that it would be a day of lucidity. Margaret smiled, a brief, beautiful flash of the woman she used to be. "Off to the palace, dear?" she asked, her name for the St. Augustine. "Yes, Mom. Off to the palace," Ellie replied, her voice brighter than she felt. The Palm Court was already a symphony of controlled chaos when she arrived. The scent of espresso and expensive perfume filled the air. Waitstaff glided between tables laden with pastries and porcelain, their movements a choreographed ballet of service. The morning rush was demanding, but Ellie moved through it with an expert's grace. She placated a demanding businessman whose croissant wasn't flaky enough, charmed a family of tourists into ordering the high-margin juice blend, and shared a quiet, knowing smile with Mr. Gable, a widower who came in every morning to read the paper, just as he had with his wife for 40 years. Through it all, she was aware of Blackwood, a shadowy presence observing from the edge of the room. She saw him adjust a flower arrangement with a flick of his wrist. She saw him cast a disapproving glance when a child dropped a spoon, the clatter and affront to the room's hushed ambiance. She felt his gaze linger on her as she spent a moment too long ensuring Mr. Gable's cup was full. Be invisible, she told herself. Be perfect. By early afternoon, the chaos subsided into a genteel hum. Ellie was catching a breath near the service station, mentally calculating her tips, when the grand entrance doors swung open and a man stepped inside. He was not the usual St. Augustine guest. His coat was a well-worn tweed, frayed at the cuffs. His hair was untamed, and his face, etched with a profound weariness, was several days unshaven. He clutched a battered leather satchel and looked around the opulent lobby with a lost, almost apologetic expression. He was the kind of person society trains you to look past. Blackwood, standing near the concierge desk, saw him instantly. His posture stiffened, and a look of sheer indignation crossed his face. He began to move, a predator closing in, ready to discreetly but firmly eject this unwelcome intrusion before he could disturb the paying clientele. But Ellie was closer. Her station was near the entrance, and she saw him first. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. In his, she didn't see a threat or a nuisance. She saw a man who looked utterly exhausted, a man who seemed to be carrying a sorrow too heavy for his own shoulders. Acting on an impulse she couldn't rationalize, an instinct that defied years of training and Blackwood's iron-fisted rule, she picked up a menu. She stepped directly into Blackwood's path, a small, unassuming barrier against his cold authority, and offered the man a warm, genuine smile. "Table for one?" she asked, her voice a quiet invitation. The man looked startled, as if he'd expected to be rebuffed. He gave a slow, grateful nod. Blackwood froze, his face a thundercloud of controlled fury. In the silent, gilded expanse of the Palm Court, a battle line had just been drawn, and Ellie had no idea she was fighting for a man who held the history and the future of the St. Augustine Grand in his hands. Ellie led the man to a small, discreet table in the corner, one partially obscured by a large potted fern. It was the least conspicuous seat in the room, a small act of protective strategy. He sank into the plush velvet chair, his movements stiff, and placed the worn leather satchel on the floor beside him. He stared at the ornate menu she presented, but his eyes weren't focused. He seemed to be looking through the gold-embossed lettering at a memory or a world far removed from this one. "Can I get you some coffee, sir? Or perhaps some tea?" Ellie asked, her professional tone a shield against the glare she could feel emanating from across the room where Mr. Blackwood stood, watching. The man looked up, and for the first time, she noticed his eyes. They were a startlingly clear shade of gray, intelligent and sharp, though clouded by a deep-seated exhaustion. Just a coffee, please." "Black," he said, his voice raspy, as if from disuse. When she returned with the steaming porcelain cup, he was staring up at the grand ceiling, at the intricate hand-painted murals of mythical figures that had been commissioned by the hotel's founder, Alistair Croft, a century ago. A faint, sad smile touched his lips. "Have you decided on something to eat?" Ellie asked gently, sensing his distraction. He flinched, his attention snapping back to her. He glanced down at the menu, at the prices that could feed a family for a day. A $28 omelet, a $22 bowl of oatmeal. A flush of what looked like shame crept up his neck. I seem to have misplaced my wallet, he mumbled, his gaze dropping to the table. My apologies, I think I'll just have the coffee. It was a common enough excuse, one she had heard many times before, but his embarrassment felt different. It was raw, genuine. Her heart ached for him. She thought of her own precarious finances, of the constant humming anxiety of not having enough. She knew what it was to feel that sting of pride and shame. It's a cold day out there, she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. The kitchen made far too much of the New England clam chowder for the lunch service. It's wonderful. Let me bring you a bowl on the house. We can't let it go to waste. It was a lie and a risk. Blackwood abhorred waste, but he abhorred unauthorized comps even more. His head shot up, his gray eyes wide with surprise and a dawning gratitude. I couldn't possibly. Please, she insisted softly. Alistair Croft himself had a rule. No man leaves the St. Augustine hungry. It's an old saying around here. She had invented the quote on the spot, but it felt right. It felt like something the legendary, benevolent founder would have said. The man's expression changed. The gratitude was still there, but now it was mixed with something else, a flicker of shock, of profound recognition. He simply nodded, a look of stunned acceptance on his face. Thank you, he whispered. Thank you very much. As Ellie walked toward the kitchen, she could feel Blackwood's eyes tracking her every step. She placed the order, using her own staff discount code and telling the chef she'd pay for it from her tips later, a small conspiracy to keep it off the official books. This was a direct circumvention of policy, a dangerous act of rebellion. But the relief in the man's eyes had felt more important than any rule. The man, he never offered a name, ate the soup slowly, with a quiet reverence. He wasn't just eating, he was observing. Ellie, busy with her other tables, was unaware of the intensity of his scrutiny. He watched as she knelt to tie the shoelace of a small boy, earning a thankful smile from his mother. He saw her notice that an elderly woman was struggling to read the menu, and watched as she discreetly brought over a pair of reading glasses from the Lost and Found, saying, "Sometimes the lighting in here can be tricky." He saw her handle a rude, dismissive hedge fund manager with unflappable grace and patience, never letting his arrogance crack her composure. He also saw, with growing clarity, her interactions with Mr. Blackwood. He saw the manager stop her mid-stride, his voice a low, venomous hiss. That person in the corner is still here. Your job is to serve our guests, Eleanor, not run a soup kitchen for vagrants. The table he is occupying could have been turned over twice by now. This reflects poorly on you and on me. Ellie's face remained a polite, neutral mask. Yes, Mr. Blackwood, she said, her voice betraying no emotion. He will be leaving shortly. When the man had finished his soup and his second cup of coffee, he motioned for Ellie. As she approached, he was fumbling in his coat pockets. I'm so sorry, he said, his face a picture of genuine distress. I truly don't have my wallet. I was hoping I might have tucked some cash in my coat, but nothing. I can leave you my watch. It's not much, but it's old. He began to unbuckle a simple, well-worn leather-strapped watch from his wrist. Absolutely not, Ellie said immediately, placing a hand gently on his to stop him. Please don't worry about it. It was my pleasure. But the manager, I heard what he said to you, the man insisted, his gray eyes filled with concern for her. I don't want to cause you any trouble. This was the moment of decision. The safe, correct, and policy-driven action was to call Mr. Blackwood over, explain the situation, and let him handle it, which would likely involve calling security and having the man escorted out in disgrace. She thought of her mother. She thought of the stack of bills on her kitchen counter. She thought of 7 years of diligent, exhausting work. Then she looked at the man's face, at the quiet dignity warring with his humiliation, and she made a choice. It was a choice rooted not in policy, but in principle. "Don't you worry about Mr. Blackwood," she whispered, giving him a conspiratorial wink. "It's already taken care of. You have a safe journey now." She took the empty soup bowl and coffee cup and walked away, leaving the man sitting in stunned silence. She went to the service terminal, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She planned to pay for the order herself, a small price for a man's dignity. But before she could pull the cash from her apron pocket, a cold, authoritative voice sliced through the air directly behind her. "Just what do you think you're doing, Eleanor?" Ellie froze, her hand hovering over the screen. She turned slowly. Harrison Blackwood stood there, his arms crossed, his face a mask of cold, triumphant fury. He had seen it all. "Mr. Blackwood, I was just closing out the check," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Were you?" he purred, his voice dangerously soft. "Because, from my vantage point, it appeared you were dismissing a bill. The bill of a non-paying vagrant you invited into this establishment. A man who, by your own gross negligence, has occupied a prime table for over an hour, costing this hotel revenue and, more importantly, sullying its atmosphere of exclusivity. He had lost his wallet," Ellie stammered. "It was a simple bowl of soup, sir. It was going to be thrown out." "That is irrelevant," Blackwood snapped, his voice rising, drawing the attention of guests at nearby tables. The quiet hum of the Palm Court began to falter. "What is relevant is policy. What is relevant is the standard we are sworn to uphold. The St. Augustine is not a charity. We are a beacon of luxury, an image I have worked tirelessly to maintain, an image you have just tarnished with your misguided, sentimental populism." He took a step closer, his eyes boring into hers. "You did not call a manager. You did not follow protocol. Instead, you took it upon yourself to make an executive decision, undermining my authority and compromising the integrity of this institution. You chose to prioritize a piece of street refuse over the reputation of the St. Augustine Grand." The cruelty of his words was a physical blow. "Refuse," Ellie whispered, aghast. "He was a person, a hungry person." "He was a liability," Blackwood declared, his voice now a booming proclamation for the entire lobby to hear. "He was making an example of her. And so, it seems, are you. Your emotionalism is a weakness we can no longer afford?" He stood back, adjusting his tie, assuming the role of judge and executioner. "Eleanor Vance, as of this moment, your employment with the St. Augustine Grand Hotel is terminated, effective immediately. Your final paycheck will be mailed to you." A collective gasp went through the room. Her friend Maria, behind the pastry counter, had her hands over her mouth. The two security guards began to walk towards her, their expressions grim. Across the room, the man in the tweed coat stood up, his face pale, his fists clenched. He opened his mouth to speak, but Ellie, in a haze of shock and despair, gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of her head. It was too late. The damage was done. As they walked her towards the staff exit, past the gilded cages and marble floors, Ellie felt a profound sense of dislocation. The palace had cast her out. She had been fired not for a mistake, but for an act of kindness. And as the heavy service door swung shut behind her, sealing her off from the only stability she had in the world, she was swallowed by a terrifying, all-consuming silence. The walk home was a journey through a city that suddenly felt alien. The familiar streets of her neighborhood were a blur of indistinct shapes and muffled sounds. Ellie felt as if she were moving through water, the weight of Blackwood's words pressing down on her, squeezing the air from her lungs. Each step was a conscious effort, her legs heavy with the sudden, crushing burden of unemployment. When she finally reached the door to her small third-floor apartment, her hands trembled so violently she could barely fit the key in the lock. The click of the bolt sliding back sounded unnaturally loud in the silence. She stepped inside and leaned against the door, closing her eyes. The scent of lavender potpourri and old books, the scent of her mother, the scent of home, did little to soothe the chaotic storm in her mind. Fired. The word was a vicious, repeating drumbeat in her head. Fired for a bowl of soup. Fired for upholding a principle she'd thought, foolishly, that a place like the St. Augustine was built on. She sank onto the worn floral sofa, her purse dropping to the floor. The springs groaned, a tired, weary sound that mirrored the ache in her soul. Her first thought, sharp and terrifying, was of her mother. How would she pay for the specialized memory care center she'd been saving for? The brochures were sitting on the coffee table, their glossy pages showcasing sunny rooms and compassionate staff, a world that was now utterly, impossibly out of reach. How would she even afford Margaret's medication next month? The cost of the Donepezil alone was staggering, a monthly mountain she could barely summit even with her salary and tips. Panic, cold and sharp, began to rise in her throat. She wrapped her arms around herself, a desperate, futile attempt to hold the splintering pieces of her life together. She had been a model employee. For 7 years, she had sacrificed evenings, weekends, and holidays. She had absorbed the rudeness of entitled guests, soothed the tempers of stressed chefs, and covered shifts for sick colleagues without complaint. She had done everything right, and it had all been erased in a single, brutal moment. Her gaze fell upon a small, framed photo on the mantelpiece. It was her father, standing proudly in his St. Augustine doorman's uniform from 30 years ago. He had worked at the hotel for nearly 4 decades, a fixture of quiet dignity at its grand entrance. He had been a man of immense kindness, known for keeping dog biscuits in his pocket for guest pets, and for always having a comforting word for a weary traveler. He believed in the soul of the hotel. He used to tell her stories about the founder, Alistair Croft, a man who allegedly knew every one of his employees by name, and who believed that the true measure of a hotel's greatness was not in its thread count, but in its capacity for kindness. He built that place to be a sanctuary, Ellie, her father used to say. A place where everyone, from a king to a commoner, could find a moment of grace. What would he think of what the hotel had become? What would he think of a manager like Blackwood, a man who saw a hungry person not as a human being, but as a stain? The bitter irony was suffocating. The very institution her father had loved and served with such devotion had just chewed her up and spit her out for embodying the very values he had taught her. A new emotion, hot and fierce, began to burn through the numb shock. Anger. This wasn't just an injustice against her. It was a desecration of her father's memory. It was a betrayal of the hotel's own legacy. The St. Augustine, under Blackwood's reign, had become a hollow facade, a beautiful, gilded shell with a cold, rotten core. It valued profit over people, appearances over principles. She walked into her mother's room. Margaret was sitting in her favorite armchair by the window, looking at a photo album. She looked up as Ellie entered, her blue eyes, so much like Ellie's own, clouded with confusion. "David, is that you? I was just looking at our wedding photos," she said, her voice soft. David was Ellie's father. He had been gone for 10 years. A fresh wave of pain washed over Ellie. She knelt by her mother's chair and took her frail hand. "No, Mom. It's me, Ellie." Margaret blinked, a glimmer of lucidity returning. "Ellie, dear, you're home early from the palace." The simple, innocent observation shattered Ellie's composure. The tears she had been holding back finally came, silent and agonizing. She rested her head on her mother's lap, the scent of lavender and old memories enveloping her. She wept for her lost job, for her father's tarnished legacy, for the terrifying uncertainty of the future. But most of all, she wept for her mother, for the cruel, relentless disease that was stealing her away, and for her own terrifying inadequacy in the face of it. Margaret, in a moment of pure, instinctual motherhood that transcended the fog of her illness, began to stroke Ellie's hair. "There, there, my sweet girl," she murmured. "Whatever it is, it will be all right. You are stronger than you know." As the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the small apartment, Ellie felt a loneliness so profound it was a physical ache. She had never felt so utterly, completely defeated. The palace had crumbled, and she was lost in the ruins. While Ellie's world had shrunk to the 4 walls of her silent, grief-stricken apartment, a universe away, in the very heart of the gilded cage she had just been expelled from, a very different storm was gathering. The man in the tweed coat, the quiet, weary figure known to Ellie only as a nameless recipient of her forbidden charity, was now ensconced in the hotel's most hallowed ground, the Alistair Croft Presidential Suite. This was not merely a room, it was a kingdom. Spanning the entire top floor, Its floor-to-ceiling windows offered a god's-eye view of the city, a sprawling tapestry of glittering lights in endless motion. The air itself seemed filtered, smelling faintly of lemon oil, aged leather, and the intangible scent of old money. The ragged coat, a convincing prop acquired from a second-hand store, lay discarded on a silk ottoman like a shed skin. In its place, the man wore a simple dark gray cashmere sweater that spoke of quiet, effortless quality. His weary, apologetic posture had vanished, replaced by an easy, commanding stillness. The battered leather satchel, which had looked so out of place in the palm court, now sat on a vast, polished mahogany desk. Its contents were not the meager possessions of a vagrant, but a state-of-the-art camera and several lenses, the tools of his chosen trade. Beside it lay a slim laptop and a thick, bound stack of corporate financial reports, its cover emblazoned with the elegant, familiar crest of the Croft Hotel Group. This was Julian Croft, and as he stared out at the city his family had helped to build, he felt the crushing weight of a name he had spent the last 15 years trying to escape. He was a man who had intentionally lived his life in the negative space of his own legacy. While the Croft name was synonymous with five-star luxury, Julian had found his purpose in the stark, unvarnished reality of the world's forgotten corners. As a celebrated photojournalist, he had chased truth in war zones, documented famines, and given a face to the faceless in sprawling refugee camps. His camera was his shield and his scalpel, allowing him to observe the world with a passionate detachment. He had believed, with the fierce conviction of a man running from his own shadow, that this was his way of atoning for the privilege he was born into. The hotel empire, the endless board meetings, the talk of profit margins and brand positioning, he had left it all to a board of directors, to polished, professional managers like Harrison Blackwood. He had trusted them to be capable stewards, to maintain the machinery of the business while he pursued a higher calling. He had been catastrophically, unforgivably wrong. The summons had come 3 weeks ago, a crackling, urgent satellite call from his great-aunt Beatrice, the 80-year-old matriarch and the only other Croft who still held a seat on the board. Her voice, usually a gentle, reedy whisper, had been sharp with an anxiety that cut through the thousands of miles of static. "Julian, you must come home. The business is sick." "Sick?" he had asked, picturing financial ruin. "Beatrice, the quarterly reports look stronger than ever." "That's the disease," she had retorted, her voice trembling with frustration. "The numbers are beautiful, but the body is rotting. We are making more money than ever, and our guests are more miserable than ever. The review scores, Julian. They speak of a place that is cold, arrogant, and utterly devoid of warmth. Staff are leaving in droves. They call it Blackwood's Fortress of Fear. Your grandfather? Alistair built a home. They have turned it into a bank vault with beds. His legacy is being erased, one soulless transaction at a time." Alistair Croft's vision of a sanctuary of grace had been supplanted by Blackwood's brutally efficient, market-tested motto, "Perfection at a premium." The phrase had made Julian's stomach turn. It was the antithesis of everything his grandfather had stood for. So he had returned, not as the prodigal heir, but as a ghost. For 2 days he had walked the city streets, his camera bag replaced by the worn satchel, his designer clothes swapped for the weary tweed coat. He wanted to feel the city not from the back of a chauffeured car, but from the hard bench of a city bus. He wanted to approach the St. Augustine's grand entrance, not as its owner, but as the kind of person his grandfather would have personally welcomed, with a warm handshake and a kind word, regardless of their station. He had come on a reconnaissance mission, a quiet search for the flickering pilot light of his family's legacy. He had found it. It was burning with a quiet, steady flame in the heart of a waitress named Eleanor Vance. He had seen in her eyes the same gentle empathy that had been his grandfather's trademark. And then he had sat there, paralyzed by his own self-imposed rules of non-intervention, and watched in silent, horrified disbelief as Harrison Blackwood, the man entrusted with protecting that flame, had publicly and cruelly extinguished it. The shame was a physical thing, a hot, coiling serpent in his gut. His inaction had made him complicit. As he'd watched Ellie's slumped shoulders disappear through the service exit, he realized the truth. His grandfather's legacy was not an abstract concept to be managed by a board. It wasn't a stock price or a profit margin. It was a living, breathing thing that existed in the small human moments of connection. A moment like a waitress offering a bowl of soup to a stranger. A moment that Harrison Blackwood, in his spreadsheet-driven worldview, could only see as a liability. His phone, a sleek, anonymous burner he'd used for his undercover mission, buzzed sharply on the desk, startling him from his reverie. The caller ID read, "Mark Jennings, Chairman." Julian let it ring twice before answering, his face setting into a cool, neutral mask. "Julian?" Mark Jennings's voice was a slick, confident purr, the sound of a man who believed he was in complete control. "I trust you've concluded your little anthropological study? I hope you found it illuminating." The condescension was palpable. "You could say that, Mark," Julian replied, his voice level. "Excellent. Well, I'm glad you've gotten that out of your system," Jennings continued, oblivious. "Just had a call from Harrison Blackwood. Seems there was a bit of a personnel issue this afternoon. Had to terminate a problematic employee. Apparently, she had a habit of letting vagrants loiter in the Palm Court, giving away food. Can you imagine? In this day and age, Harrison handled it with his usual decisiveness. He's a fine manager, Julian. A real asset. Exactly what we need to keep the numbers heading north." Julian's grip on the phone tightened until his knuckles were white. He squeezed his eyes shut, the image of Ellie's humiliated face flashing in his mind. A fine manager. The words were a grotesque perversion of the truth. "A fine manager," Julian repeated, his voice dropping to a dangerously quiet timbre. The purr on the other end of the line faltered, sensing a shift in the atmosphere. "Tell me, Mark," Julian continued, each word a chip of ice, "did your fine manager happen to mention the specific physical description of the vagrant I was impersonating?" The silence that followed was absolute. It was a sudden, profound void, more eloquent than any words. Julian could almost hear the gears grinding in Jennings' mind, the frantic calculation, the dawning, stomach-plummeting horror. "Mark," Julian said, his voice now cold, hard steel, devoid of any pretense. "Listen to me very carefully. I want you and the entire executive board, every single one of them, in the hotel's main boardroom tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. sharp. And here's the most important part. Under no circumstances are you or anyone else to contact Harrison Blackwood. I don't want him warned. I don't want him prepared. I want to see him in his natural habitat, blissfully unaware that his entire world is about to be dismantled. The performance review is about to begin." He hung up the phone before Jennings could stammer out a reply, the sharp click echoing in the silent suite. He walked back to the grand window, the city lights below seeming to mock him with their indifferent beauty. He had come home expecting to find a few misaligned processes, a corporate culture that needed a gentle course correction. Instead, he had found a cancer, a malignant tumor of spirit and purpose, with Harrison Blackwood at its core. And he knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that the only way to save the St. Augustine was to perform a radical, immediate surgery, starting at the very top. His mind was racing, connecting the dots of the afternoon's tragedy. He strode to his laptop and, using his override credentials, accessed the hotel's secure HR portal. He typed in the name Blackwood had so casually discarded, Eleanor Vance. Her file appeared on the screen, a sparse digital summary of a life's work. 7 years of service, impeccable attendance, a short list of commendations from guests for her patience and kindness. Not a single demerit. Not one. He scrolled down. Emergency contact, Margaret Vance. Next of kin, David Vance, deceased, former employee. The details snagged his attention. A flicker of a memory, distant and faded. He navigated to the archive personnel files, the system's interface a clunky, outdated relic of a different corporate era. The screen glowed a pale blue, a digital graveyard of past employees. He typed in the name, David Vance. A single file appeared, Dorman, employed, 1975-2014, 40 years. His eyes scanned the notes section, a compilation of decades of performance reviews. Exemplary record, beloved by guests and staff, a true embodiment of the Croft standard, knows every regular guest by name, an institution in his own right. Julian leaned back in his chair, a sickening wave of realization washing over him. He remembered his grandfather years ago, sitting in this very suite, gesturing out the window. "You see that man down there, Julian?" Alistair had said, pointing to the doorman, a sturdy, smiling figure in a perfectly pressed uniform. "That's David Vance. He's the heart of this hotel. He's worth more to this place than all the marble in the lobby. Remember that. A business is not its building, it's its people." He stared at the two files open on his screen, the names connecting with the force of a physical blow. The woman Harrison Blackwood had publicly humiliated and cast aside for an act of kindness was the daughter of the very man his grandfather had considered the hotel's heart. This was no longer a simple corporate failing. This was a desecration. It was a personal, profound insult to his grandfather's memory. An unyielding resolve settled over him, as solid and unyielding as the granite foundation of the hotel itself. Tomorrow was no longer just a board meeting. Tomorrow was a reckoning, and Harrison Blackwood would be the first to face the judgment he so richly deserved. The next morning, Mr. Harrison Blackwood patrolled the Palm Court with the self-satisfied air of a victorious commander. The previous day's unpleasantness had, in his view, been a necessary culling. He had reinforced the standard. The staff was moving with a new, nervous efficiency. There would be no more unauthorized acts of charity under his watch. He was adjusting a place setting, his back to the entrance, when a sudden, profound hush fell over the room. The clinking of cutlery and the low murmur of conversation ceased. Blackwood turned, annoyed by the interruption. Standing in the grand archway were the 7 members of the Croft Hotel Group's executive board. In the center, leading them, was the disheveled man from the day before. Except he was no longer disheveled. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, his hair was neatly styled, and his weary expression had been replaced by one of cool, commanding authority. His gray eyes, now sharp and clear, swept across the room and locked onto Blackwood's. Blackwood's mind struggled to process the scene. He blinked, certain he was mistaken. But they were still there, walking towards him, their expressions a mixture of grim apprehension and nervous deference to the man in the lead. "Good morning, Harrison," the man said. His voice was the same, but the raspiness was gone, replaced by a smooth, resonant baritone that commanded attention. "I believe we met yesterday. You saw a man in need. I, however, saw a manager who has fundamentally misunderstood the nature of his job." Blackwood's face went white. The blood drained from his head, and for a terrifying moment, he thought he might faint. He recognized the man's face now from old photographs in the hotel's historical archives. A younger version, but unmistakable. The eyes. They were Alistair Croft's eyes. Mr. Croft," he stammered, his carefully constructed composure shattering into a million pieces. I had no idea. Sir, it's an honor. I didn't recognize you." "That, Harrison, was the entire point," Julian said, his voice devoid of warmth. He stopped directly in front of the trembling manager. "I came to see what my grandfather's hotel had become. I saw a place of breathtaking beauty, run with impeccable efficiency. But I also saw a place that has lost its heart, a place where a rule is more important than a person, a place where the daughter of a man who gave this hotel 40 years of his life is thrown out like garbage for showing a flicker of human decency." He turned to the stunned staff and guests who were watching, transfixed. "My grandfather, Alistair Croft, did not build this hotel to be a museum of empty elegance. He built it to be a sanctuary, and the soul of that sanctuary has always been its staff. Yesterday, I witnessed an employee, Eleanor Vance, uphold that founding principle. She offered comfort to a stranger at personal risk, and for that, she was fired. That is not an error in judgment on her part. It is a catastrophic failure of leadership on ours." His gaze returned to Blackwood, as cold and hard as granite. "You are not a steward of the St. Augustine's legacy, Harrison. You are its gravedigger. You have mistaken cruelty for strength and elitism for elegance." He then turned to the board chairman. "Mark, as of this moment, Mr. Blackwood's tenure as general manager is over. His services are no longer required. He used the exact same cold, dismissive words Blackwood had used on Ellie. Please have security escort him out. Through the front door. I want everyone to see that this era of soulless management is officially over. As a stunned Blackwood was led away, his face a mask of disbelief and humiliation, Julian pulled out his phone. He found the number for Eleanor Vance in the employee file. He pressed the call button, his heart pounding. After 3 rings, a tired, grief-stricken voice answered. Hello? Ms. Vance? Eleanor? Julian said, his own voice softening. My name is Julian Croft. We met yesterday. I was the man you gave the soup to. The silence on the other end was thick with confusion. I don't understand. I know, Julian said gently, and I am so sorry. I am more sorry than I can say for what my silence cost you yesterday. What you did was the single most honorable thing I have witnessed in a very long time. You were the only person in that entire hotel who truly understood what the St. Augustine is supposed to be about. He took a breath. Eleanor, I need to ask you to come back to the hotel. Right now. I've sent a car for you. There is a great injustice that needs to be made right, and I can't do it without you. Ellie walked through the grand entrance of the St. Augustine Grand, feeling as though she had stepped into an alternate reality. The car, a sleek black town car, had arrived just as Julian Croft had promised. The staff, who only yesterday had watched her being fired, now greeted her with looks of awe and relief. Mr. Blackwood was nowhere to be seen. Julian was waiting for her in the center of the palm court, which he had cleared of all guests. He stood alone, a solitary figure in the vast, elegant room. He walked to meet her, his expression one of profound, undisguised remorse. Eleanor, he began, his voice earnest. Thank you for coming. What happened to you was a symptom of a disease that has infected this company, a disease of apathy that I allowed to spread by my absence. I can't apologize enough for that. You're Alistair Croft's grandson? She asked, the reality of it still sinking in. I am, he confirmed, and I have been a disgrace to his name. I lost sight of what he built. You, with your simple, profound act of kindness, reminded me. You reminded me of my father, and of yours. He gestured to the small corner table where they had sat the day before. Please. They sat opposite each other. The dynamic was completely transformed. They were not server and guest. They were 2 people at a crossroads. I read your father's file, Julian continued softly. David Vance. 40 years. My grandfather used to talk about him. He called him the kindest man in New York City. He said your father was the true heart of the St. Augustine, a heart that this hotel has tragically lost. Tears welled in Ellie's eyes at the mention of her father, tears of pride and sorrow. Eleanor, I cannot fix the past, Julian said, leaning forward, but I can try to build a better future, a future your father would be proud of. I am not offering you your job back. I am offering you a new one. I am creating a new position, effective today, Director of Guest and Employee Experience for the entire Croft Hotel Group. Ellie stared at him, speechless. Director? Me? I'm a waitress. You are the most qualified person for the job, Julian insisted. I don't need another MBA in a suit. I need someone who understands that true hospitality isn't about profit margins. It's about dignity. It's about making people feel seen. It's about the soul of the place. I want you to help me find the soul of this company again. We'll give you all the training, all the resources you need, a team, an office, and a salary that will ensure you can give your mother the best care in the world without a moment's worry. He reached across the table and looked at her, his gray eyes filled with a desperate, hopeful plea. I'm not just offering you a job, Eleanor. I'm asking you to be my partner in restoring my grandfather's legacy. Help me make the St. Augustine a sanctuary of grace once more. Ellie looked around the beautiful empty room. She thought of her father's pride, her mother's needs, and the soul-crushing struggle of the past few years. And for the first time in a long, long time, she saw not a dead end, but a beginning. A chance to turn her own quiet principles into a force for meaningful change. To honor her father's memory by building something truly worthy of it. A slow, steady smile spread across her face. A smile that reached her eyes and banished the shadows of worry that had lived there for so long. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and strong. "Yes, I will." In the profound, sun-drenched silence of the Palm Court, a revolution had begun. It was not a revolution of shouted slogans or broken barricades, but one that unfolded in the quiet dignity of a restored purpose. The air, which only yesterday had been thick with the chilling tension of fear and surveillance, now felt light, breathable. Sunlight, streaming through the grand arched windows, seemed to catch the crystal glasses with a warmer, more brilliant sparkle. Among the staff, a transformation was underway. The stiff, robotic movements of automatons afraid to make a mistake were being replaced by the relaxed, genuine grace of professionals who felt seen and valued. A quiet word here, a shared, knowing smile there. These were the first green shoots of a new culture breaking through the frozen ground of the old regime. This was not a hostile takeover detailed in financial papers, nor was it a corporate restructuring mapped out on a whiteboard. It was a revolution of the human heart, a seismic shift in values sparked by the simplest of catalysts. A single, unprompted bowl of soup, the resurrection of a forgotten legacy, and the quiet courage of a waitress who chose the command of her own conscience over the cold command of her superior. The St. Augustine Grand, which had for so long been a perfect, gleaming palace of cold, intimidating perfection, a museum of luxury where people were merely temporary exhibits, was finally, tentatively, on the path to becoming a home. The icy veneer of elitism was beginning to melt, allowing a long-forgotten warmth to seep back into the marble floors and gilded ceilings. All because one woman, armed with nothing but her own empathy, refused to accept that a person's worth could ever be measured by the fleeting contents of their wallet. The incredible, almost fable-like story of Eleanor Vance serves as a powerful, luminous reminder of a truth we too often forget in our fast-paced, metrics-driven world. It is a testament to the profound and often underestimated power of a single, intentional act of kindness. Her journey reminds us that the true architecture of our character is not built from the granite of our job titles or the gold of our bank accounts, but from the countless small, often unseen choices we make to honor the dignity of others, especially when they can offer us nothing in material return. It is in those quiet moments, when no one is watching and there is no reward to be gained, that the true measure of our soul is taken. Eleanor's compassion was not a naive or abstract virtue. It was forged in the crucible of her own life of struggle, in the quiet desperation of watching her own mother fade and worrying about the bills on her kitchen table. It was this intimate understanding of vulnerability that set in motion a tidal wave of positive change. A single stone of compassion dropped into a still, stagnant pond, sending out ripples of change that grew into transformative waves, powerful enough to wash away years of corporate rot. Her story proves, with breathtaking clarity, that one person's unwavering integrity can indeed challenge and reform a broken, soulless system. Her journey teaches us that the greatest and most enduring strength is not found in rigid authority or ruthless efficiency, but in the quiet, unyielding force of empathy. It shows us that our most valuable, non-negotiable assets are not listed on any stock exchange, but are the principles we carry within our own hearts. What may seem like a small, thankless gesture, a bowl of soup, a kind word, a moment of genuine connection, is never truly small. It is an investment in our shared humanity, a courageous act of faith that could be the very catalyst that changes not just one life, but the entire world around us. If Eleanor's extraordinary story of courage and compassion has moved you and reaffirmed your belief in the goodness of people, we invite you to be a part of this message. By giving this video a thumbs up, you're not just clicking a button. You are casting a vote for kindness, adding your voice to a chorus that believes empathy is not a weakness, but our greatest superpower. Don't let this story end here. Share it with someone in your life whose own quiet acts of goodness often go unnoticed, or with someone who might need a powerful reminder that their kindness truly, deeply matters. And for more real-life, inspirational stories like this, stories that will restore your faith in the power of the human heart to overcome adversity and transform the world, we warmly encourage you to hit that subscribe button and turn on all notifications. Join our community and ensure you never miss a story that celebrates the extraordinary courage found in ordinary people.